welcome to this week's episode of the Marina podcast. I am, as always, your host, and today I have the most amazing guest, Belinda Bailey, who is a love and relationships coach and also a deep and dear soul sister of mine. She is the proud author, well, I'm proud of her, but I'm sure she's also proud of herself, of this amazing book that I have in my hand called The Love Codes. And it is 5 steps to an authentic and evolutionary relationship. And it's for women who are ready for soul satisfying love. So if you are tuning in today, I hope that you are ready for soul satisfying love. And if you already have it, let's talk about how to expand it. And if you don't, let's talk about how to get it. So Belle, do you mind if I call you Belle? Because I'm used to calling you Belle, but
Absolutely.
I can call you. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Sorry, the sound cut out for a second. I'm so happy to be here, Marina. It's so fun talking with you.
Yeah, we'll work with tech. It's just the realities of life, and I'm grateful for it. I'm going to start with 2 questions that don't pertain to the book, but I'm so keen to dive into this. I know how many of my tribe, this topic is very alive for them, very real for them, and I'm so excited for you to share your wisdom on it. But first things first, which animal best describes your personality, nature, way of being in the world, and why?
Ooh, I didn't know you were going to ask me that. Right now, I would probably say a lion. And why? Because she likes to lay around in the sun. And because I have a fierce love and devotion and loyalty to my sisters and to my family. And I do like to think of myself as royalty, meaning I like to have all the nice things and do all the nice things, but it doesn't really mean much to me unless I get to share it with everybody else.
That is, well, of what I know of you, I think that's a very accurate statement. You are incredibly loyal and fiercely, like a fierce female, when it comes to defending your pride, so to speak, if we go with the lion. So I love that for you. Now, of the superpowers or any that you can conceive of, which would you choose to have and why?
Superpowers. So I think I have some superpowers already. What are the superpowers? What are my options, Marina?
You know what? It's different all the time, but people will often say things like teleport or invisibility or flying, but some people will say reading minds, or it could literally be, like pausing time. Like, well, I get some really cool answers.
Ooh, pausing time. I wouldn't mind pausing time. Okay, so pausing time, but where I can still move. That would be super cool.
That was kind of what they said too. It was like not to pause it as in to stop it, but to create space within the frame.
Oh my gosh. I'd definitely pause time. And what I would mostly do with that is I would pause time. I'd get up out of bed before the rest of my family. I'd shower, I'd have a cup of tea, I'd do some exercise, I'd meditate, and then I'd press go and still be able to spend the morning with them. That would be amazing.
That would be the me time you'd slot in there. I love that. All right. Well, Val, congratulations, beauty, on the book. It's amazing. I mean, I've worked with you before and I know how phenomenal you are at all things relationships. And what I mean by that, and I kind of want to actually have it's not so much a tricky conversation, but I want to give us permission in this conversation, or I want to address with you. So what do I want to address? This is not articulate way to start this conversation, but we live in a world, I don't know if you agree, where it is getting trickier and trickier to remain politically correct or inclusive in the eyes of the different ways in which we're now being divided, is perhaps the cleanest way I can say this. And, having worked with you, and particularly this book, it is, would you agree, although it relates to any dynamic of a relationship, you have written it to a woman about being in relationship to a man. Is that okay for me to say about your book?
Yeah, 100%. And it's tricky. So yeah. I understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really want to have that conversation. And I want us to feel free to just today talk about relationships between men and women, because even though there, I want the, the gay community, I want anyone who identifies as any gender to feel welcome to drop into this conversation. I want them to know that they're welcome to drop into it, but this is what we're focused on, because that is your speciality. And that is the area or the nuance within our vast spectrum of diversity that you serve. And I want the world also to know that that's okay. Inclusion means you're welcome to stay and listen, but it doesn't mean that you have to be an expert for everyone. Do you agree with that?
100%. And Marina, it's a really, I'm so glad you brought this up, because nobody's ever actually said it up front before. And it's always a little bit there for me.
Yeah.
Because it is real. And I am, and you know me personally, I'm one of the most inclusive people that I've ever met myself. And what I specialize in, however, is as you say, I'm really specific, and I really specialize. It's not just in a relationship between men and women. It's specifically relationships between very powerful women who are quite successful, and who've done a lot of self-development, who are in or want to be in a relationship with a very masculine man who's going to be able to take some charge, and where she can feel that she can surrender. So it's a very specific niche that I work with. And what I often say is something like, not everybody has to love chocolate, but I can be a chocolate specialist and not say, without saying you can't eat ice cream and any other desserts. They're just not my specialty. And that's exactly what this is about.
Yeah, so I just wanted to cover that off, because the other thing that I find when I talk about relationships that I like to be really clear about is masculine and feminine are energies that exist inside of any, well, we could say living thing, but particularly humans. And we're going to today discuss them and unpack them as they pertain to being entities within a woman, and energies, sorry, within a woman, and energies within a man. Yeah. And the reason that I wanted to kind of really open that up first off is because, I've shared openly on this platform, and particularly all of the courses and programs that I talk about, that I myself, without really knowing it, for the vast majority of my life, was heavily in a masculine energy as a human who identifies as woman. So I really operated from very controlling, very powerful, very creating in my world, very outward focused, penetrating into the world powerfully, right? And it took me, and a few major hiccups in my life, as some people would call them, but I like to call them, awakenings of grace, really, to kind of start to create new realities. But when I've worked with you in the past, and when we've discussed this in the past, I have still had a major craving, even though I identify as a woman who's very comfortable in her masculine, and who has kind of created a lot of quote unquote success and results that the world really reveres and praises by being in her masculine. I still, at my core, crave, covet, and desire a man who is more masculine, so that I can still be that part of me, but also surrender, as you said. So I wanted to kind of open that frame and kind of discuss masculine and feminine, and then we're going to talk about man and women, because I know that one of the things you really helped me with, and also other women with, is this idea that often in relationships, it feels like a battlefield because we're both in our masculine. But can you just explain how that affects, the types of relationships you work in, and particularly how that affects intimacy in relationships?
Yeah, great. What a great, I wish all of my interviews could be set up like that. Thank you. So look, the thing is, you're right. Most women, particularly the women that are attracted to the work that I do, when you're out in the world and you're accessing that masculine energy, what a lot of women think when they start to do this work, or when they consider it, is that needs to change, and it doesn't. And that's exactly what the beautiful thing is, Marina, is that there's a place and a time for all of the energy that we have. And it's actually a choice where we want it to be and how much we want it to be. But what women haven't learned is that it is a choice, and that it's a sliding scale or a spectrum, and we get to choose where and when we are on the spectrum between feminine and masculine. And we haven't learned that because we have been programmed and shown how to be in our masculine all the time, because we live in a results-oriented community and world. And so we are always accessing our masculine to go out into the world to be successful, and that's awesome. But like you just said yourself, Marina, so many women that come to me say, I love being successful, but I want a man who can be more directive than me, who can be more than me. And it doesn't happen because what happens with that energy, that masculine and feminine energy, is that masculine energy and masculine energy together, they do create a battlefield, like you said, because it's not a bad thing. It's competition. Like masculine energy is competitive and it's fun. And like when you get two masculine energies together going out for the day to have fun, it's fun. You like have a banter and you're a bit of a competition. But when you come home into a relationship, and if you're the kind of woman who wants to come home and feel like a queen, you don't want to be in a battlefield. But if you're still in that strong masculine energy, he's got two choices. Either he's going to meet that masculine energy and it ends up a battlefield, and that's how most relationships end up, or he will be kind of pushed into the feminine. If you're taking up all the masculine space, he'll end up in the feminine. So what happens, right, Marina, is so many women, and you'd know so many like this yourself, say, I really want a man to be like, to step up and be the man. And then they become less and less masculine in the relationship. So what I like to talk about and help women to do is to understand that you can be in that masculine out in the world. It's about learning how, when you come home, to choose to step into a different end of the spectrum so that you can be more in your feminine, which actually allows him to step up and be that really driven, masculine man that does stuff for you. You know, the guy who does the dates, who thinks of things, who makes you feel like you're taken care of.
I love this so much. And as I'm listening to you, and again, inside of different areas or containers, I've shared very openly about this, but I had a long-term relationship, just to share, where 100% I was so in the masculine that his only option was to move into the feminine. And he was really happy to do it because it worked with his patterns. But as we grew and evolved, and I think I was ready to be less in that space, I was like, where is he? Why can't he step up? But the thing is, I had conditioned him and he had conditioned me through our co-relating, that wasn't available. And now I find myself, and, you know, I remember working with you inside of this current relationship, where I have found a very masculine man, but sometimes I just want to rip my hair out because I'm like, why would you, you know, but he will not back down. Like he is like I've done the self-work in between, mind you, which I know we want to talk about, which allowed me to magnetize a man of this level of masculinity. But sometimes, and I love when you use that analogy where you talk about like the sticks, like putting your fighting sticks down. And that for me was really big. And as you've just said, coming home and choosing, but I want to get a bit like, I really love for my listeners to be able to take away things that they can apply in their lives. So it's all good and well when we're like, okay, come home, and then you just choose, you know, don't be so masculine. So what is a way? And then someone like, they don't even know how they're being masculine, right? We don't know that we're doing it. We don't know that we're pushing in that way. But I found for myself, and I would love suggestions to hear from you, how people can tune in. Anytime that I'm trying to fix or correct was kind of how I got to see that I was being masculine. Like in conflict, it wasn't that I was trying to yell louder, you know, or fight louder. It was more that I'd be like, if you could just see it this way, like if you could just see it this way, we wouldn't even be fighting. So like I was trying to peacekeep, but in a way that is actually very masculine. Like I wasn't in the practice of speaking from my feelings, or, you know, so if a woman's like, okay, Belle, I hear you, I'm supposed to come home and not be masculine.
Yeah.
How do I do that? Like, what would you say to that?
Well, I'll give your listeners a couple of like really solid tips that they can really start to do now. And I'm going to share a couple. And one of them I'm going to share with your listeners is something that I wouldn't share in all platforms, because it really requires a level of awareness. But I know that your listeners have probably a broader level of awareness than some. So let's start there, because I think you just mentioned it. And that is about, it has something to do with feelings. So let's use the scenario that you said where, you know, you're in an argument, and we don't always think of it as an argument. We're in a heated discussion and we want to create peace. And so we can see, this is the thing, right? As women, we can see where it's going. We can see what would be better. You can, like I'm saying, as a woman, you can see that. But telling your man what that is gives him, as I said before, it gives him two choices. One, to butt heads with you, because that's masculine. Telling, directive energy is masculine energy. The opposite to that is being receptive. So the receiver rather than the doer, rather than the giver. So giving him that directive energy, he has two choices. One is to meet it with masculine, which means more fighting, or to recede into the feminine, which means that you're left with a feminine man, which isn't what you want. So we need to, instead of directing the energy and telling him where to go, we need to see how it makes us feel. Because the other thing is, with directive energy, we're seeing where it's going. We're then analyzing. We're getting into our mind and saying, well, this is happening, and then that's happening, and so therefore this is what needs to happen. It's all very mental. It's all very masculine. So what I'm going to suggest to your listeners, which is really something that I do with all of the women I work with, and you know this, Marina, is if you're in an argument, or if you're not getting along, if there's some sort of conflict, actually feel the feelings. I mean, right? It's like, whoa, really? And so many women that I work with, and I know so many of your listeners would probably first be like, well, first of all, I do feel my feelings. And I would say, yeah, you probably do, but you feel them in a flash. And then you're more likely you're either suppressing them, saying, oh, that's there, but let's move on, or you're analyzing them. So I say emotionalizing them, where you say, oh, I'm angry, but that's because he's saying it this way. And if he said it this way instead, then I wouldn't be. So I'm just going to let him know. That's an analytical process. You're not just feeling them. So what I want you to do instead is just feel your feelings. So he's saying whatever it is that he's saying, I'm going out tonight, even though we hadn't discussed it and there's other things we need to do. Instead of saying to him, well, that really hurts me or that really upset me because we said we were going to do this. So maybe you could do this first. And then once you've done that with me, then you could go out. That's masculine. What we want to do instead is counterintuitive to people who've done a lot of self-work, because we actually want to say, oh, that makes me feel annoyed, and then stop yourself. Feel annoyed. Let yourself feel your feelings. Feelings are the magic of the feminine, because when you let yourself truly feel a feeling, it comes and goes pretty quickly anyway. And if you feel the feeling, you then respond from that feeling. You don't talk about it. You don't say, I feel annoyed now. You be annoyed and express yourself from there. This puts you into the feminine. It puts you into your feelings. And the really cool thing that happens is, masculine energy wants to fix and help. So what happens? If you're actually feeling annoyed, he is compelled to want to sort it out. So he does the thing that you want him to do without you needing to tell him.
It's actually, I just want to pause and let that land for the listeners. And I actually appreciate you acknowledging the level of my listeners, because they truly are growth getters. Like, they're in it for the awareness. But I want to let that land because it requires more. It seems simple and it sounds simple, but it requires so much more self-awareness and self-presence. But when you do it, and this is what I wanted to share, is that it's a game changer. Like, you go, oh yeah, sure. But that's because, as Belle just said, you're still talking about the feeling, not being the frequency of the feeling. Because when you're that frequency of the feeling, a true masculine will immediately go to protect. And I've seen this myself, where I'm like trying to be logical, and I like you say, I've got it figured out. I know how to get us all through really safe. And then instead of just saying I'm really frustrated, when I actually drop into the sadness of frustration, he immediately goes to like, oh, we'll figure it out, don't we? Like, way softer energy, because I put down the stick, as you often say too, and go into the feelings. So that's huge. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's amazing just listening to you. I mean, I remember watching the transformation in you too a long time ago, and as you're talking about it, I'm thinking of times when it happens for me still in my marriage. I got my six up and then go, put them down, and I'm getting goosebumps. It's so beautiful in that moment where you switch, and then my husband will come to me, literally will come to me and go, oh baby, I don't want you to feel that way, and gives me a big hug, and it's just the best.
And I kind of want to dive in here with this, with something that I think I hear a lot, is people like, I just need him to be different, or I just need him to get on the train, or I just need him. And of course, as we know, as growth workers, there's no fixing anyone else, and no one else really needs to be fixed. But as I often say, it takes two people to dance, but only one to change the routine.
Yes, 100%.
So in this way of being, if you learn, or if you can self-adjust, it does shift how they be. So instead of kind of thinking about, oh, I've got to change how they are, change how you are, and they will match and mirror you in a completely different way. So like, even though it might take work and take practice, really sit with what Belle's just shared, because it's massive.
Massive.
I mean, feeling the feeling is always the answer, but feeling it in the experience in partnership is a whole nother level.
And it does require, not to downplay, like you say, the process that you have to go through to do this. It does require some reprogramming, because we genuinely, to be able to feel and express from our feelings is counter to everything that we've been told that men want.
Yes.
Men say, oh, she's crazy, or she's hysterical. But I promise you that actually, when you're able to be in your feelings in a way that, has had a level of healing, so you're not responding from trauma and you're not reacting, then men are so happy. They just are looking, craving that permission to step into the masculine caregiver.
And see, I think what you just said there, Belle, is the distinction. Because, so I'm going to just piggyback on that, or maybe have this really land. What Belle is not saying is don't project onto your partner emotionally. But what she is saying is be in the truth of what's alive for you, just in the presence of your awareness of what's alive for you. So not a projecting it like, you did this to me. It's like, oh, I feel, it's a statement, as opposed to you made me feel, which is a story.
Correct.
So don't project it onto them. And that's where men do often, get frustrated with emotional women, because often we're blaming them for all our emotions. But if it's simply like, I'm in this experience of this, I'm in the experience of that, they get to kind of be in awe of our attunement too, don't they?
Yeah. Let me give you a really quick and relatable example that happened to me this morning with my husband. He had been up all night with our son because he wasn't well, and he and I got to sleep, which was great. And then he came into the room this morning, into the kitchen, and we were getting everything ready. It's always, mornings are always really busy, and he said to me, I wouldn't mind going having a little nap before I have to start work. We had about an hour, and inside me I felt like saying, well, no, we've got things that need to happen, and it's the morning. And that's something that I would have said in the past. And I could even feel that in me. And so I stopped myself in my tracks, because I've been doing this work so long. And I asked myself, well, how do I feel? And I settled into the feeling, and I looked at him and I said, I know you're tired, but you know what? It's the morning, and I just want you around because I like you being here. Totally irrational. And poor guy hadn't slept. He didn't need to be there. There was nothing, but I just wanted to have him around. Do you know what he did? He was like, no, babe, gave me a kiss, made a coffee, and stayed up and chatted with me. And that's not just what he would always do. That's not just because that's who he is. Normally, if I had responded the old way, he used to say, well, look, that's what I need. I've been up all night, and it'd be that conversation that we all know, and he'd go and have his nap. But, I was able to stop in my tracks, feel the feeling, tell him in its irrationality, I just want to have you around. And he wanted to be there.
So in your book, Belle, you talk about, 4 main types of women, which I think is really cool, because there are women who kind of identify as like, I can never find a guy. There's literally no men in the world. And then there are women who are like, there's lots of men, but they're all this particular type. They're all ghosting me, or they're all abusive, or they're all assholes. So we kind of do seem to have these patterns of familiarity that are unique to us, or seem unique to us. We may know other people who also experience them, and yet we see other people with different patterns. So I think it's kind of cool how you talk about who this work can be for, and acknowledge that we are all coming from different places into the same unified desire of soulful connection and evolutionary relationships, as you call it. So do you want to just like touch on those 4 types so that people can go, oh, yep, that's me?
Sure. I think that when we talk about the types of women that this work is good for, really there's a few types, right? But I think the one that is really interesting to me at the moment, I just got off a call from a woman from Canada who's about to come into the program, and she rang me and said, I feel attracted to this work, but I don't know if it's for me, because I'm in a marriage and I think it's over, and I don't really want it not to be over. And yeah, and I think that's fantastic. And there was because there's another woman who's doing the same course who said hers is about to be over, and she's kind of happy for it to be over. And you think that these two women are at the opposite ends of the spectrum, but the thing is, like you said, it's a spectrum. Relationships are a spectrum. We're either single, wanting a relationship, or we're in one and we want it to be better, or we want to get out. That's kind of the spectrum. But so many women that come to me, let's put them into two categories to begin with. We've got single women and partnered women. And when we're the women who are single either feel like you said, there's just nobody. They're not being asked on dates. And these are women who they're beautiful women, they're smart women, they're interesting women, but they're just not getting asked out on dates. And it's so depressing for them, because out in life they can make things happen, right? They can make their work happen, they can make opportunities happen for themselves, but they find themselves unable to. You can't make a man ask you on a date. These women sometimes will find themselves, well, I'll make the first move, so they ask men out on dates. What ends up happening then is that they end up in situations or connections that aren't the way they want them to be, because they end up with men who step into a feminine role because the woman has had to be really directive about it. Then you've got the women who feel like they're dating all these men, but they're just NQR. Like they're just not the right kind of guy. They're either not translating into long-term relationships, or the men are a little bit feminine and they're not really taking charge, and they're not really meeting them on that soul level. And these are two different experiences, both for single women. And this work is definitely for these situations. And then, as I mentioned, the other end of the spectrum is if you're in a relationship. And I mean, so many women that I've worked with are married, and I just mentioned these two women that one wants to leave a marriage and one doesn't. But the majority of women that come to me, really, they don't know what they want. They're married and it's not working, or they're in a long-term relationship and they're trying to decide if it can be better. Or if it's too late and it can't be better. And the most beautiful thing, I love working in this area, because what always happens every single time is that once you start to access this feminine empowerment in relation to relationships, your relationship or your partnership, it becomes clear to you. It becomes as clear as day whether it's working or not working. And if it's not working, it dissolves in grace, and it's really effortless. And all of the women whose relationships that's happened for through this process, they all will tell you the same thing, that it was graceful, and that they still really have a great relationship with their ex-partners. And then there's the other women who, through doing, and then those women, what ends up happening is that you've cultivated this empowered and healthy feminine polarity in your relating self. That's how you start your next relationship. You start from the top rather than the bottom. And that's a great place. And then, of course, the other one is when women who are in a relationship and it's not really working. I mean, I love that, because when you watch how the relationship in real time, like you shared just before, Marina, that, when you started to do some of this work in your current relationship, you just see it in that moment, it changed. And that's so satisfying.
So what's your take, Belle, on, the philosophy, I guess, that relationships are essentially tools or pathways, if you will, to heal wounds? Essentially that, relationships are a wound match on some level or in some form. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're all destined to fail, but rather that they are opportunities and containers for your own personal growth. And so I suppose my question is, let me just ask that. What's your take on relationships being wound matches?
Yeah.
Yeah, and for your growth.
I think that relationships can be many different things, and there are different types of relationship and different types of attraction. And those who've done my work, and you might remember this, Marina, there's one type of attraction that leads to a karmic relationship or karmic attraction. And certainly that is an opportunity to heal and grow parts of yourself. That kind of relationship is a really healthy type of relationship to have in maybe your 20s, because that's a time of life when you're learning about yourself. If you get to the point, it's usually in your 30s, maybe 40s these days, where you want to have the type of relationship where you're building an empire together, whether it be a family, a home, or a business. Having a karmic relationship in that type of situation is not ideal, because you want it for a different reason. And so, when you ask my opinion on it being a place for growth, if you're here on this earth consciously to grow, everything is an opportunity to grow. Your relationship, your work, everything. And you know that, Marina, and all of your listeners would be like, yeah, that's me. So for those people, and I'll speak specifically to that, choose the level of growth that you want in your relationship. So for instance, I choose my relationship to be an oasis and a place for rest and reset. So that's the foundation and the value of our relationship. Now, of course, there's opportunities to grow, because I am here on earth to grow, but I have chosen for my relationship not to be that constant battleground for growth.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Belle, because in your book you do, I think, write, and I might be misquoting slightly, I haven't got it earmarked, but I remember reading that you wrote, relationships should be easy. And now I've been with people, throughout different relationships where it was really easy and we never fought and it was kind of, super flow. But equally, looking back, I can see that we were kind of nurturing ineffective habits. Does that make sense? But we were kind of like safe in the harbor, being ineffective. And then different relationships, different dynamics, as you've so clearly just mentioned, they serve different purposes. But I remember one particular person that I said, well, I've come to realize that conflict, because I had coded, due to my upbringing, because I didn't see a lot of conflict, that conflict meant you're breaking up. Like, if I'm honest, I was like, conflict is like trouble. You just avoid it at all costs. And then I had more adult relationships where conflict was more present. And I was like, this is bad. If we fight like this, we shouldn't be in a relationship. Because I had all of these, inner codes, if you will, or unconscious beliefs around what conflict meant. But then I remember being, with someone else, and they were then saying, I was like, well, I've come to realize that conflict is normal and natural in a relationship. And they were like, well, no, relationships should just be easy. So I was like,
confused.
Yeah, like, well, it's kind of like everyone does have a different take on it. And so I love what you're saying there, is you get to choose. Like, your relationship absolutely could be the pool in which you have your greatest growth if you choose it to be. But I suppose it's much like anything. You can also ask for that growth to still be joy-filled, and like not traumatic. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't.
Let me give a hack to your listeners. If you really, you're all committed to growth, and if you want to have a relationship that is an oasis, my hack is make sure that you are exposing yourself to opportunities to grow elsewhere. So engage in courses, read books, do all the things, so then it doesn't have to happen in your relationship. You can choose it to be a little bit different. And Marina, you brought up something that is essential to mention. I do say relationships are supposed to be easy, but I don't say that they can just be easy tomorrow. We have been programmed to think that they're supposed to be really hard. We've even been programmed to think that growing is always going to be really hard. No, it's going to be painful at times, but it doesn't always have to be a massive chaos. It's about what you just said. It's about the codes. So that's why I do what I do, because there is a template for relationships where they are relatively easy, where they are an oasis and you can still grow. But we have to recognize, first of all, what are the codes that we've been programmed to believe, and then we need to release those, and then we need to learn a whole new template for how to relate. Once you've taken those steps, learning the new template is easy, because you do one thing once and you go, oh my God, this is amazing. And so it's easy to keep on doing it. But yes, there needs to be some healing needs to occur.
And so I know you talk about it in the book, but like I have a lot of clients that I know believe in the list, and have the list.
At
Which,
least.
the thing about the list, I suppose, is it does bring presence to intentionality and desire. And there's, I know that we're not saying, what am I trying to say? Tell us why the list isn't just the whole truth
Yes.
and all we need. Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of women like, I've written this list and why am I not getting the guy that matches the
Yeah.
list?
Oh, the list, bloody list. So, we write a list of what we want. Look, the easy answer to that, and I think that will be the biggest and best takeaway in this environment, is that when you write a list of the things that you want, you're right, that's your conscious mind doing it. But you all know that your conscious mind is just a little baby. It's the unconscious that's going to direct you and get the things in life that it wants or that it believes that you want. Your conscious mind can be going, rah, 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 I want this, I want that. And the unconscious is just kicking back going, yeah, I know what you really want. So we need to speak the language of the unconscious. And that doesn't happen by just saying, I want a man who's got a successful career. What you want to do instead is you need to focus on the feeling that that thing would give you. There's a whole bunch of reasons for this, and unless, we won't go into them all, but I can promise you that this works. If you say one of the things is, I want a man who's got a successful career, we ask ourselves, how does that make me feel? Oh, that makes me feel safe. So what you can do instead is say, oh, what I want is to feel safe. Your little tiny conscious mind has no idea what that looks like. You might think that looks like a man who's got a successful career. Then you're with him and you don't feel safe at all. And you think, hang on, that was on my list. I got everything, and I'm still not happy. But instead, if your list is an internal embodied state and you're looking for a match to that, then you meet a guy and you go, oh my, and I promise you, the majority of the women who do my work end up in relationships, and I mean getting married and very happy, and they say, this is not the kind of guy I would normally go for. He was not what I thought. But you meet him and everything feels right. You feel amazing. He doesn't have a successful career. He's got a really simple, casual career or whatever, but it all feels right. And it's because what you really want, that one thing is to feel safe, and with him you feel safe, and all the other things that were on your list have been hit on the feeling and embodied level.
Yeah. I love that. And so then I'm just like with client, I know in the past with clients, and I'm sure you see these women too, who it's like they say they want a relationship, but they're going about every possible which way to not step into a relationship, whether it's through extreme judgment or super high expectations or honestly almost like a comical filtration system, but to them it's really real. Would you sort of be curious then around, like, you can be, because it's very much like you say, and I'm you're preaching to the choir here, conscious mind and unconscious mind, with all of it sits in the unconscious mind, which is why inner work, growth work is the only work, because the outer world is just a mirror of that inner world. But when someone's saying, I'm saying this because I know I can think of a handful of clients like that I already work with, but I want them to hear it from you. They're saying, and even sometimes, and I say pseudo doing because they're kind of doing it, but not in the way that would get a result that they want, where they're saying, I want this and I want that and I want this. And yet it's like, well, what they haven't yet addressed is maybe there's an unconscious, like, full hell no to what relationship really is, or what a man is. And so I know with the work you call it like a poison blurt, but this is one of your ways of seeing what's under there. So let's bring in a faux client, imaginary client right now, who's like, well, all the guys I either date, they're not what I want, or there's literally no one I want coming to me with what I want. So what would be like a tip for that single person to really finally get the person that is the right fit to show up? Like, what would be 1 or 2 or 3 steps that you might suggest they do?
Wow, it's a big call, because in my experience, when a woman is really saying that they want a relationship, but they're blocking it all the way, there's usually a lot of fear. involved, and there's probably some trauma involved, and it's not their fault. And I just love these beautiful women, Marina, you know, because they really want to do it, but they're blocking themselves from doing it, and it's not their fault. You know, it's experience from the past, it's cultural programming, there's so much involved. And so in all honesty, I would say that ideally what needs to happen is they need to do some deep inner work to find those blocks and get help to release them, because that is going to free them up. And failing that, or something for them to do just simply on their own, I would suggest what I mentioned before, start to think about how you want to feel in a relationship and spend some time doing that. And the reason I say that, Marina, is really ideally what they need to do is discover what are the unconscious blocks, those poison blurbs, but we can't do that on our own. We actually can't, because they're unconscious. We need to do that. Actually, having said that, I have got, this is not a plug for my book, but in my book, I do have a free download to the poison blurb process that they can do with me taking them through it. So that is something that they could do. But otherwise, just to spend time, think about how you want to feel with a man, and spend time, like a little meditation, spend 2 minutes a day embodying that state, feeling that state. And if you think, oh, I've never felt safe, or I've never felt excited, or I've never felt those things, think harder. And it doesn't have to be a time when you had that feeling in a relationship. So let's say what I really wanted was to feel safe. I'll sit down and I'll conjure up the feeling of safe. If I can't do that, I think, well, when was the time I felt really, really safe? And I'm thinking of a time now was when when I was with my maternal grandfather and I was young, and I stayed there for a few days, and I just felt safe. So I'd think about that time, I'd close my eyes, and I just feel all those feelings in my body, and do that for 2 minutes. What that's going to do is start hardwiring your unconscious mind for that experience, and it will then start to effortlessly kind of seek it out for you.
Yeah. And then, you know, I don't know how, if you agree with this, but I know for myself, but perhaps because I'm a trained coach and know how to dig. But if someone's having a persistent complaint, you know, that there's no one there or whatever it is, sometimes you can also simply like even ask yourself, what is the feeling I have when I think about this being my reality? You know, because we're often talking about the story, but what's the feeling? Find it in your body, like out of your brain, and go, where is this sitting in my body? And then go into your body and just dig a little deeper. You know, where's this feeling come from? Where did I learn it? Who am I staying safe with? Why is it here? Like, and people go, I won't remember those questions, Marina. And what I would say is there's really no wrong question to ask, because something's either going to give you a really interesting answer, which you can then ask another question, or you can just feel around in the dark until you grab it, and you'll know when you grab it, and then be with it. And as you said, you know, it's like we do have such, and that's why we love the work we do. We have such love for humans, because we realize the way in which it's like none of our fault, but equally it doesn't mean anything about you, all the things that you think mean anything about you. And it's all opportunities to unfold and evolve in new ways. So when people do the work and they get clear on what's blocking and they release them, and then they, you know, feel into the coherence of what they want to create, and they start to feel more comfortable with that, and they learn, you know, you've got 5 codes in the book. I don't know if you want to touch on them, but they're very powerful. And I know that even by referencing them briefly here, like, I want people to understand that the way to really do this work properly is to be guided by Belle and to go through her processes, and at the same time, and why I talk about this a lot, there's a big difference between learning and embodied change. And a lot of us will learn a lot of stuff. Like, we'll read a book like Love Codes and be like, wow, that's amazing. That makes so much sense. That's yes for me. But being in the practice of it and in the participation of the new way of being is what changes your life.
100%.
Having the awareness and the learning can assist with that. It's definitely the first step, but it's not going to get you to the end game.
No.
So, I mean, you sharing some of your 5 codes isn't going to necessarily mean someone doesn't need the book or your services. Of course they do. But if you don't want to share all 5, can you share 1 or 2?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And look, and you're right. And that's why in my book, I have given some tools that people can actually do as well, because you're right, just reading about it, just thinking about it, and it is part of the process, right? Like, it's a huge step, but we do need to do the thing as well. And as you said, yeah, there's 5 codes, and really, I guess to unpack them all right now, it would take a lot. But I think I'll talk about a couple of them. One of them is invisible influence, is one of my favorite codes, and it really is that invisible influence is a state that we're able to embody as women, where we start to affect that change in the men around us. So, you said before, it's so frustrating because we can't change men, but you said how when we do change ourselves, then there's a ripple effect, and it's 100% true. So in invisible influence, what we do is we unpack the blocks that women have around men, and there are blocks whether we're conscious of them or not, and there's many that we share, which is that men aren't comfortable with feelings, or men aren't interested in commitment, or men don't really listen very well, or whatever it is that you men aren't interested in me. And in invisible influence, we learn how to elicit from men the kind of behavior that we really want. And you would have seen this yourself, Marina. There's some processes that we go through that are very, very specific to remove the blocks, the programming that have been very unwelcomely put there by our society, so that we can then, and that's important, we have to remove the blocks first. And then we learn a whole communication package, which is a rewiring of an innate way to communicate that's innate for women, that we have never been shown or role modeled. But when we start to undig this package, uncover this package, the women that do the program just kind of go, oh, yeah, duh, oh my gosh, what? Like, that's just there. It's so natural. And by starting to understand and learn this way of being and this way of communicating and way of responding in the world, what happens is there is that quantum effect where the men will start to respond in the way, and they do start to respond in the way that they want. So women who are single and finding it hard to get men to go on dates with, they start to find that they're being asked out on dates. Or if you're in a relationship and your man is not doing much around the house, or he's not listening, or you don't feel like he really cares, you start to elicit that kind of behavior from him, and it's got nothing at all to do with asking them to do it. Nothing at all. It's entirely about removing the old blocks that are magnetizing old behavior, and then learning a new package. And that's one of my favorites of the codes, because it really, it gets results, right? It gets the results that women want right now.
And that's something that I know that you're very big on, is that one of the key things, maybe, I think this is, I may be not using your correct wording, so feel free to update what I say, but that I feel like you say that the key to having relationships is not like learning to love better, but learning to let ourselves be loved in a more powerful way. Like it's really, a lot of it is that. So can you kind of unpack what you mean by that, and maybe use better linguistics than I just did?
Sure, I think you did a great job, but I'll be happy to. I just 2 days ago wrote a whole article for a magazine on this particular topic, because they wanted me to comment on the love languages, which I think is lovely. But in my experience, the love languages is all about learning, putting the responsibility on other people to love you the way you want to be loved, which is fine, and it gets results, some results, but they're very limited, because where the greatest change, the greatest value comes in when it comes to being loved, is learning how to be loved well, because we as a culture don't know how to receive love. We just don't. We don't even know how to receive, full stop. How many women, right? Like, how many women, that's the number one thing, is I need to receive. So, okay, I'm going to start having baths and doing nice things for myself, and that's great. But when we open up our capacity, so we broaden our capacity to receive love, because right now I have a very narrow and limited idea of how love looks and how I can feel love. And that's based on the programs that were written inside of me when I was little, and I had parents showing me what love meant. And like, if I'm like everybody else in the world, then my parents weren't actually very good at loving anyway. And so my program of how I can be loved says I get loved by people not responding to me and me feeling really lonely. That's shit. but that's how most people are programmed to receive love. So actually what we want to do is learn how to open up those barriers so that we can receive love in all sorts of ways. So now I receive love by kind words and physical touch, and whenever, it's like you start to have this filter where you're looking for evidence that I'm being loved rather than looking for evidence that I'm not being loved. And then when women start to do this in the work that we do, it's amazing, because if you're single, all of a sudden you go, oh, there's all these men around me and they're really nice and they're gorgeous. And often women, especially who are single and feel like they're only ever attracted to the not so nice guys, as soon as we start to learn to open up and receive love more and to be loved better, then you start to be recognized and receive and be attracted to men who actually want to treat you really well. Same thing with our partners. You'd be surprised where you feel like your partner's not really giving much, he's not stepping up, he's not doing much. I would wager a bet to 95% of the women who are saying that to themselves right now, that in fact, to no fault of your own, you're unaware of the love that's coming your way from your partner. So as you learn to receive love better, as you learn to be loved well, your partner starts to feel like, oh, she's actually receiving my love, and he starts to be happy, he steps up, he does it more. And it's just this domino effect of healthy, loving connection that happens in a relationship.
Oh, I have so many thoughts. I mean, receiving has really been the greatest growth endeavor for me personally since, well, for probably for the last 10 years, if I'm honest, really since my divorce. So that's actually longer than 10 years, but no, it's not. Gosh, I get lost in the years. Anyway, point being, there is so much around receiving. I actually did an Instagram story just about this topic the other day, not so much as it pertains to romantic love, but I agree with you. As a culture, particularly high-performing women in, our first world country, really have resisted receiving, and it's very feminine to receive, as you mentioned earlier. The feminine is the receiver, the receptivity. It allows itself to be penetrated. It opens to that physically, emotionally, mentally, energetically, all of it. And so I just have so much to say on this. And the only thing I would add to what you said is knowing that kind of when we work on receiving in any way, we work on it in all ways. Because for me, initially, I was not great at receiving love or compliments or praise, or support. Support was really a big one. And I had some beautiful men, non-romantic men in my life who were a great mirror. And I often quote one, Adam, who said to me, Marina, if you want a man to open a door for you, you sometimes have to let him get there before you. And it was just like, he was talking literally, because he was such a gentleman of a man and a good friend of mine. But it was a great way to very gently be reminded that if you're always being the man, if you're always ahead, if you're always doing the thing, then you are the nag who's like, why didn't you clean up? Well, because you just fucking cleaned up.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you've already done it, and there's this energy, a lot of us, and I've had to do a lot of really confronting kind of like digestion, if you will, of the egoic masculine female within me, who truly does feel or who truly felt safe, I will say, in feeling superior, in feeling smarter, in feeling more capable. Like I felt safety in that. And I kind of had to digest and integrate that into this part of me that's like, okay, even though I know I can do that, and maybe part of me truly believes I could do it faster, better, and easier, I'm just going to sit back and let you do it your way. And people listening might be going, I can't believe she's admitting that she thinks those things. But that's where sometimes you have to get to with your growth work, to be able to let it go.
You have
because
to.
ultimately it's like, I feel like at the moment, and I've got 2 daughters, so I'm super pro them watching these wonderful films that are like, fuck the patriarchy, excuse my language. I just went to all the F's in the last 5 minutes, but we'll put explicit on this now. And there's that energy. And I wanted to talk to you actually about this as well. So receiving is very feminine, and yet we have a quote unquote feminist movement, which really in many ways has moved us away from the very classic dance of polarity, which some people could argue is really 1950s and outdated. And there's there's kind of a push-pull energy. Would you agree? It's like, it's so old-fashioned, Marina, to say to be receiving and let him care for you. And at the same time, on a deep level, I think that's what women
Yeah.
want,
Yeah.
but we've fought for the opposite. So can you just speak
Yeah.
to this? Like, how do I be a strong feminist and receive
Totally.
and you know what I mean, and get what I want? And yeah, it's such a dance for us women.
This is my favorite question. It's always my favorite question, because I'm so let me paint a picture of the feminine woman that I'm speaking about. Okay, she's getting up in the morning, she's kicking goals, she's kicking all the goals, she's wearing a gorgeous pantsuit with some killer heels, and she's going out and she's meeting people and making changes in the world and making, big shifts in the world. She's a high flyer. Then she comes home to her husband, and she has had a massive day, and she greets him at the door, or he greets her at the door. It doesn't matter. They both come home, and she says, "I'm so tired, honey," or "Oh my gosh, I would just love to be fed and given red wine and to just not have to do a thing." And he says, "I hear you, babe." He calls for takeaway. He runs her a bath, and he goes and puts the kids to bed while she sits in the bath and reads a book. And then once she's finished that, she gets up, makes a couple of calls that she needs to make for work, and then they go to bed and make love. Now, that's a feminine woman. It's got nothing to do with being the one who cook. I hate cooking dinner for my husband. I mean, no, that's not true. I shouldn't say that, but I'm being extreme. I hate cooking unless it's like a long, luscious day of being able to cook, and I don't do any house cleaning at all. My husband and I both work and both run our own businesses. I'm extremely receptive to him. But that's my intimate relationship. It doesn't have to be who you are in the whole world. And the other part of this, and this is what I'm super passionate about, women were bloody just subjugated for so long. And in order to have the right to access our masculine, because accessing our masculine is a good thing, we should be able to do it, and we should be allowed to do it. We should be able to enjoy it. So in order to be able to, we had to fight to be able to do that. And we did. Where we need to change course in our feminist fight now is we no longer need to fight for the right to be able to be masculine. We need to now fight for for feminine values to be valued just as highly as masculine. So we live in a world still where we, instead of saying, being really directive and productive isn't the only way. We can be receptive and creative, and that needs to be as highly valued as everything else. We haven't done that yet. Instead, we said, okay, well, I'm just going to get my masculine on so I can be in the world. Great. Now we need to fight to have feminine values upheld, that creative is just as valuable as being directive, and that downtime and rest time is just as a value as being productive. So it's not about feminine values being an empowered feminine. It's about valuing those things rather than saying we all have to, the only things that are valuable are the masculine traits. You can still have both. We need to value the others as well.
Yeah, I feel like when we look back at the traditional feminist movement, what is it now? Almost 5 decades ago. Like we're moving on, aren't we? I know I think there was, like you say, it's like women were fighting to be like men, or to be like the patriarchal, the energy of the masculine.
Oh, we would be recognized,
Yes, so we be recognized as equal. Yeah. And I agree with you now that we need to value feminine energies, but I also feel that we get to do that for all genders. I say that because 100%. I feel like we'll also have, if men were more, and I really do feel for men, because I feel like we have so many women, because like you say, and this is true of all minorities. I mean, and it's interesting. I recently had a really personal experience where I was kind of in big trouble through political correctness around, what I had done or that associated to a minority group. And I realized that on a deeper level, on a different kind of relationship, I relate to minorities very differently. I don't really see them as, what's the
lesser.
word? Yes, lesser. In fact, I really identify with the victor and the survivor and the power inside of a minority group. Like, I don't continue to hold that kind of victim or that energy of they've been really what's the word? There's a P word. It's just not
perpetrator.
Thank you. Against, or yeah, like I really do see the warrior in the what other people might see as weak, and so where some people need to prop up a culture or an identity because they believe that it's been weakened due to its perpetration. I believe that those are the strongest identities and cultures around because they've been so persecuted. Persecuted is what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Persecuted against, and they've risen. And so where I feel particularly between men and women is we have this energy of fucking warrior-esque, like we will not be treated as less than, and we have that now so ingrained, and all minorities do. They're actually the strongest because, as we know, hard times build strong men and women, right? And I feel that let's just be really like the white male has had less of that warrior energy of recent decades because they've had the privilege. And I mean, even as a white woman, I understand I have more privilege than other women. So it's a spectrum. But I feel for those men because they've had less people having to work for their expansion into their wholeness. And they're a little more caged in because of the way that it's been done has been most accepted and revered. So part of me is like, I feel like as we do it this time, for ourselves, let's be inclusive for the men so that we can carry them with us on our, not as in a masculine way carry them, but like allow them to join in, because as we touched off at the beginning of this conversation, masculine and feminine energies are present in all of us. So what we welcome for ourselves, let's
100%
welcome for everyone. Yeah,
100%. And that's why it's about feminine values. It's not about women. It's about feminine values, and bringing them back.
So Belle, what is like when you talk about love life spectrum levels, what does that mean?
So like I said before, relationships, it's like you're on a spectrum. There's a spectrum for most ends, extreme ends to things. And so when in our love life or in our relationship life, if you're not doing the work, and let's say you get into a relationship, whatever kind of state or level of relating that you are experiencing before you get into the relationship, that's going to be reflected to you within that relationship again. And it doesn't matter whether you're single or in a relationship, you're going to keep, and then you might get out of that relationship, and the next time you're in a relationship, it might look different, but then once you're in it, the experience from the inside is going to be the same. This is because we are not advancing our level of relating. So, the level with which we relate consciously, the level or the amount of love that we're capable of receiving, the level of polarity that we're able to embody within our relationship, it's on a spectrum. So what the intention to do when you do this kind of work is to move up the spectrum. Increase your capacity to receive love, increase your capacity to embody the polarity, so that each time you're getting into a relationship, you're getting closer and closer to your end goal, which is to be at what we call a level 5 evolutionary relationship, where you are able to receive love in its full spectrum. You're able to embody the feminine at 100%, but all the way to the 100% masculine, but at will, and choose where to move along the spectrum. You're able to move along from desire to love along that spectrum. So you're that level 5 of evolutionary relationship, and you can be there when you're single or in a relationship, because it's the capacity to relate at that level that you hold.
I love that. And I just, as you were talking, I wanted to touch back on what we mentioned earlier when we talked about relationships being for growth. And I kind of felt like what you just shared kind of maybe unpacks that more. So if we don't learn the lessons around for our own growth and ascension inside a relationship, we essentially will get more of the same kinds of relationships. Would you agree?
Well,
but if we integrate those learnings and up level our own understanding of relating, or as you said, if we can balance our relating energy within ourselves, it will magnetize in a different kind of relationship. Is that how you?
Yes, but you don't have to learn the lessons in a relationship. You can learn them on your own.
Yes.
You know, or that's why I do the work that I do, so that you can learn them in a safe container, so that the relationship itself doesn't have to be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be the place where it all happens.
So you can definitely do this growth. And I talk to all my girls in my sphere, you know, when I coach coaches and people who do dream board and things like that, I'm always like, do as much growth work as you can before you step into that primary relationship, because that's how you've got the greatest chance of having it be, you know, long-term sustainable. But I do like what you said there, like the relationship can essentially be showing us, particularly if we're seeing patterns of it, a mirror of what we need to learn and integrate and evolve to up level.
That's right. And then integrate those lessons externally. You don't have to. And so many conscious women who are learning and growing have this expectation, or they think it's a need for that growth to happen within the relationship, that they need to be able to work it out with their partner. Your partner is not your therapist. Your partner is not your coach. And so if you really want, I mean, that's why I do what I do, right? Because if you really want to have an evolved relationship, you need to work at it, but you need to have help that's not your partner, because it's just not fair on them or you.
So let's talk about, just to finish off here, sex. And I know you're I think one of the codes is actually called Evolutionary Sex, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Would you say that sex, well, I suppose what I'm saying is, would you agree that as we shift, particularly our ability to play with the dynamics of the energies of masculine and feminine, we maybe perhaps learn that sexual energy or chemistry is very much a polarity conversation? Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, the evolutionary sex part, and I think I talk about this a little bit in the book, is really the culmination of all the codes. And when you bring that into that intimate sexual situation, it's just mind-blowing, you know. And it very much is about the polarities, and learning how to embody the really extreme end of the feminine when it comes to sex is something that most women maybe will never ever do, because it's very contrary to popular ideas around sexuality. But when you're able to do that and choose to do it, it's life-changing.
So what would you say to a listener who's in a relationship, long-term relationship, right? Because we also have this story, unfortunately, in society that talks about, you know, oh, well, the longer you're with someone, you know, chemistry just dies, or you can't expect to stay, you know, super attracted to your partner. Like, we have that narrative running in our culture, which I don't think is helpful. But beyond that, I mean, there would potentially be a reason that we experience that as being true as a culture. So what would you say to someone who's like, well, I'm listening to all of this and that sounds really wonderful, and I can definitely understand, you know, that I can do some work and I can create shifts and he can step up more. But when it comes to sex, like I know I speak to a lot of women and they're like, I'm just not that interested, and I don't.
Totally.
And I'm like, what? You know, because I'm very grateful for particularly my evolution in relationship to sex and intimacy and orgasm post-divorce. It's been the most transformative. But again, as you said, because I stepped into my relationship with my feminine. So how would you kind of respond to that with someone who's like, I don't really have a drive for it. It really doesn't affect me. I'm kind of happy that we've reached this groundhog. Yeah, like to be honest, sometimes I'm like, really? But what would you say as an expert?
Well, I understand it. I ran a masterclass last night that was called Desire and Attraction in Long-Term Relationships. So it's very important and it's very prevalent. And I'll say two things, because again, it's a big unpacking, but I think two things that will help a lot for your listeners. And that is that desire, if we talk about spectrums, I love spectrums today. It's all about spectrums.
Always about a spectrum.
Well, desire and attraction, the experience of desire is such that once you've got the thing you want, you can't desire it anymore. So, I mean, because the experience of desire is literally the wanting of something. So desire is at its greatest before there's full commitment. And if you've been in a relationship that is always a little bit, there's a bit of uncertainty in it or a little bit of insecurity in it, there's going to be a high level of attraction. That's just reality. That's just chemicals. Love, on the other hand, is a state of absolute safety and absolute certainty. And in our culture, we always start off in desire and uncertainty, and that's how we enter relationships, and we run towards the other end, which is absolute safety and complete love. Now, some cultures don't start off in desire. Some cultures look for safety and love, and they cultivate desire. And it's actually the fact that there's these two ways of entering into a relationship and being in them that piqued my curiosity a long time ago and led me to do a lot of research into this very specific area. And what I came to understand is that it is a continuum where you can go from desire to love, and we think we start in one and end up in the other, but we have a choice, and we can cultivate more desire and more attraction in our relationships. But the way to do it is by introducing back in small elements of insecurity, insecurity is the right word, but it has to be done with a lot of wisdom and ecology to the love and safety as well. But it's a real thing that the attraction and desire can fade and does fade. But what is also a real thing that most people don't know is that we can start to bring elements of it back in. And again, it's a sliding scale. So we bring back a little bit of insecurity. And then when the relationship's feeling like, oh, there's a lot going on, it's a bit stressful, then we just come back up to that level of safety and love by, removing those levels of insecurity. And it needs to be a living, breathing thing. And it takes time and it takes practice, but it's definitely a real thing.
Could you give an example of something tangible that woman is like, yeah, okay, that's cool, I get that could happen. I don't really see that happening for me though. What would that even look like? What could I do to create more insecurity, to create more
sure
in my relationship?
Sure. And I'm going to give you the best answer that I can, with a little bit of a disclaimer that I don't like giving too much directive of how to do this kind of thing in a short time span, because it's very delicate. So the disclaimer is that it's there's many things that you need to consider. You need to consider what kind of relationship you have, how secure is your relationship to begin with, what is the right amount of insecurity to bring back into your relationship, and then you play with it and you test it. But if you think about it as one of the least extreme levels of insecurity might be just to have more space and time from each other. Do things more on your own. Have times and elements within your relationship where you've got no idea what each other are doing, seeing, being, having. That's one lower extreme, and it's enough for some people. And then you don't just bring that in and leave it there. You bring it in until you start to feel a little bit of tension, and you kind of go, oh, there's something going on here. And you might leave it there for a bit, or you might bring in more of that, or then you might go, that's too uncomfortable. But the point is, you do have to find an edge. There needs to be a level of insecurity, which is a little bit uncomfortable. And then on the other end of the spectrum is something like, which I don't advocate, so I don't even know how I'm going to say it, but maybe I think because people often bring it up, is having an open relationship. I don't advocate open relationships. I don't think that they work well within the realm of what I'm working with, which is committed, long-term, safe, healthy, happy, evolved relationships. But that's another end of the extreme. And there's a lot of grey area in between them.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, I think it's fine for us to leave that with people to ponder, because there's even the language or the energy around insecurity brings up stuff. So let's let people bring that up and just ponder that a little. That's a really cool concept, Belle. I appreciate that. All right, so some quick fire questions as we wrap up. What would be Belle's number one advice to elevate energy, just like in a day? And this doesn't have to be relating necessarily to relationships or intimacy, but what do you do to elevate your energy?
Oh, okay. So my energy is low. Number one is meditate. Number one. Cool. Otherwise, other than that, bounce on your little bouncy thing. What are they called? You know what they're called. Those little rebounders. Rebounders. Love a rebounder. Dance, laugh, make jokes. That kind of thing.
Cool. And what would be your number one tip to elevate empowerment? So that feeling of like you're either feeling insecure or you're feeling doubt, like what's the number one way or the number one go-to thing that you recommend for like dropping back into like empowerment?
Recognizing like acknowledging what it is that you're feeling.
Mm.
That's it.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. That's awesome. And simple and easy to do. Everyone can do that.
Yeah.
And then what would you say for someone who is like, how do I elevate my experience of expression? So it's like, I just feel like I can't express myself fully, whether this is in relationship or to the world or bring my voice. Like, what's the one thing that you utilize as a tool to help you really amplify your expression?
So if again, for me, it comes back to feeling my feeling in the body and then just letting myself speak. I'm a speaker though, I'm a talker, so that's how I express. So for me, if I feel like I'm stuck or there's a bit of a block there or I'm not getting it out into the world, I'll stop, feel the feeling in my body, and without thinking, I start talking. That kind of goes against what a lot of people think, is think before you talk, but not for me. I think just feeling and then starting to talk.
Yeah, so almost like that second and third empowerment and expression work together for you, which is cool. And so, Belle, if everything that we just recorded, and it's, not going to happen, but let's say it just got deleted, and all we could deliver to the world, either into a little microphone in their ear or in like a little message in a bottle or a major billboard in their city, that was like Belinda Bailey, and it's just your one take on, maybe not even pertaining necessarily to relationships, but like, of all the things you've learned in life, this is your truism, this is your like, hey, this is really important. Guys, just remember that.
Okay, so remember that we can say yes to love in every moment. It's up to us. And it's time to start really valuing the feminine aspect of life.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I love both of those. That's awesome. That's so beautiful. Belle, thank you so much for all your wisdom. I mean, honestly, if I know if you're listening, we covered a lot of ground today, and I intentionally did that one because I know Belle's work, and I wanted to make sure we covered off a lot of what's in her book. Obviously, we're going to link to her book, to her website, to her on all the platforms. So if you want to dive deeper, you know where to go. But I also recommend maybe listening to this podcast and a second time, just having it in the background, because we did cover a lot. But Belle, I really appreciate A, who you be in the world, B, the work you do, and C, your time today. Like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to mention, touch on, or do you feel like we're complete?
I feel like we're complete. I'm really grateful. It's been so fun speaking with you, and I just love all the questions that you asked me, and I really hope that your listeners and your viewers get a lot out of today.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that they would. Absolutely. And of course, if you do, our request, and I speak on Belle's behalf here, is share on social media about this podcast. Share the screenshot, tag, Belinda Bailey and me. And all the links to do that. And if you want, reach out to us. If you have questions, I mean, we're both committed to serving in the ways that we do. So don't be a stranger. If something hit a chord, share it. That's how we all get to be a part of the ripple. And then beyond that, if you need support, you get to ask for it. That's a really, empowered way to be in the world. What do I want and how do I get it? How do I be an active participant in that? So congratulations on the book again. I'm just like, as a friend, I'm just so like, I get chills with the joy I have in my heart for this being a thing in the world, a legacy piece. It's so, so important and so beautiful. Thank you. I love you. And I'll see you soon, but thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you, beautiful.